Hello, darkness, my old friend. Your carburetors are fucked again. But we just pulled 8 liters of gasoline out your crankcase, which doesn't even make any fucking sense how that happened after $900 of repairs in Madison. All right, so what we have here is a 2002, I believe, Suzuki Bandit. It's not my bike. It's my buddy's bike, and it's been a problem child since day one. Anyway, I actually know this bike pretty well because it spent last winter here, and it's got some issue with it that I've just not been able to figure out. But I was close. I had it running pretty well. Sometime at the end of summer last year, I think. Anyway, I've been through these carbs so many times. They are all brand new, all clean. And, well, the issue was it would not rev over about 5,000 RPMs, which indicates some kind of jet issue or whatnot, but I'm certain I've been through this carburetor plenty of times. Anyway, so I delivered it back to my friend when it was running, and it went right back into the not running mode. So he took it to a shop. I told him it's about time to let somebody who knows what they're doing take a look at it. They paid a pretty substantial fee to have them go through it, and then it came into the same exact issues. So I've been through this carburetor, somebody else went through, replaced all the parts as well, and I'm still not sure. So anyway, I feel terrible about this bike because I was encouraging my buddy to get into riding, and this is what he wanted. He converted. I really like the look of this front, so he switched it to this more standard style headlight. Took some of the fairings off, so it looks much more like a standard. The Bandit's just a cool looking bike. It's so much engine. That big inline 4. Anyway, so it's back here because my buddy has given up on this thing. Actually, he got a job out across the country on the West Coast, so it's not going to be going with him. So instead of selling it for 500 bucks, 800 bucks, whatever somebody might give him in a non-running condition, I figured, bring it over here. Let's see if I can get it running right. And so when he brought it over, he said, brand new battery. Actually, this one, Super Start Platinum. And looks like it's a sealed battery. It says it's ready to go right away. Anyway, gets it here, and it's just never worked. I put it on my tender, and, well, it's dead. So I pulled the battery out of my FCR, threw it in here, so it's sitting in there right now. It's a little bigger battery, but probably not even as good. Fired right up with some choke, so that was great. Then I noticed it's spewing a shit ton of white smoke, and I don't know what would have changed, because white smoke, if I'm not mistaken, indicates coolant could be getting into the engine. This engine wasn't touched, as far as I know. The engine wasn't touched. Actually, look how easy it is to get to the spark plugs. I can do a compression test on this thing. I'll probably end up doing that. Anyway, so what I first wanted to do, this puddle started coming out. All of a sudden, it's just starting to spew a ton of fluid as I'm seeing a bunch of white smoke fly out of the thing. And it was coming from around, actually it's dripping off of here. So I'm not 100% certain where it came from. I'm going to start it again in a little bit, but what I was checking was actually over on the other side. I was checking the oil level, which it's, let me grab a flashlight. This is worrying to me. Sorry if I can do it without a glare. Anyway, it's tough to tell whether or not it's completely full or completely empty. That being said, I've leaned this all the way towards me and all the way away, and I have not seen this change. I think the fluid's way up here. I think this thing's substantially overfilled right now. I don't know that it was substantially overfilled with oil or if something else has made its way into it, because this fluid on the ground, when I touch, it's slick. It smells of gas, but it's slick like oil, but it's less viscous. I don't think it's coolant. So my wonder is if a bunch of fuel potentially got into the oil pan, or the oil system, and how would that happen? So I'm going to start poking around. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to drain the oil. I got to see what this stuff is inside of it. And I got to know whether or not I'm right on if the oil is, or whatever fluid is in it, is way over. So I'm going to give that a shot now. Oh yeah, this is a problem. This stuff is runny as fuck. That's not just oil. I smell gas. Actually, my whole garage smells like gas because, oh my God, look at it. What the fuck is in here? I'm gonna get it out and figure out what the hell happened. Dude, what the fuck? This is gonna overflow. Who the fuck are you? Oh shit. Motherfucker. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has their opinion on somebody's fucking act, but I mean, yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Well, I wouldn't say that. They are a little complicated. They just have an opinion.
Holy shit. This is fucking insane. This is the second pan. That one's, I already emptied this once.
In 2008.
I can't believe this. I've shut the fucking petcock off now. Oh, please don't fill up again.
It's the guys with the red ties. And
this is like over a 5-liter pan.
Like, I don't know why. Like, they get a pass.
That was all gasoline. I've never seen this before. Jesus. So just looking at this thing, I really like the look of it. It's a slick looking bike. The shitty part is, I have no idea what this shop would have done to allow this. Because this bike, as far as I know, ran about 10 miles after the shop was done with it. So I'm guessing a float got stuck open or was just never set correctly. I still can't figure out. All right, there's a weird thing on this petcock. I don't like this design at all. Let's see if this will show. The petcock has 3 positions and it's got reserve. Okay, so that's not going to shut it off. It's got PRI, which is prime, and prime I believe is just wide open. And it's got on. There is no off. Like, no way to just say, no, you're not coming through. I'm looking. This isn't a vacuum operated petcock like I've got on my Interceptor. So on would make sense if this thing was air operated or vacuum operated, because then it would always be closed unless, you know, the engine was turning over. I got it in reserve now, but I actually think where it was, which is on, is where it needs to be to stop flow. But this thing sat for fucking a year in on, and it filled this whole goddamn thing. So let's say the carb float was stuck open, okay? It still shouldn't get past the petcock. What the fuck? I mean, I gotta stop yelling about this. I gotta think about this, but literally, the carburetor may be fine. Carbs may be totally fine. It doesn't matter what these things are doing right now, because if the petcock's going to keep dumping gas, all right, it starts up here, goes to the petcock. It shouldn't come through here, but it is. If I put it in prime, it's 100% coming through. If I put it in reserve, it's going to come through all the way down until it hits the reserve. And if I put it in on, my understanding is this should not start flowing. I got to figure out how this petcock actually works. But I think this, all right, so let's say the petcock works, or whatever. It lets gas through. It should get to the floats, and then the float should still stop it. So the float has to be set high. So there's no way the carb is just right. So the carb's got to come off. I got to figure out which one is leaking, or if it's all of them. But I wish I could just shut the fuel off. Actually, motherfucker, how do I shut the fuel off to the damn now? So I am reading that this is a vacuum operated petcock. That being said, I still don't see where the vacuum line is. However, well, no, maybe that's it right there. I don't know. Anyway, so it looks like if I put this between, at least one diagram I saw on the internet, if I put it between reserve and prime, So I'm not sure if that's showing. Yeah. If I put it between reserve and prime, it shouldn't leak. So there's at least two things happening here. Even if the airline, if it's just not hooked up, this shouldn't dump any fuel at all. So if the airline is cracked or ripped off or just forgot to be put on, no fuel should come through it. So something's wrong with it that it's letting any fuel out, period. Because when it was brought here, it's been left in the on position. And from what I can tell, yeah, there's only one way to put, I don't think you can put this thing on upside down. And even if you put it on upside down, let's say that this handle was upside down, it would have been in either reserve or prime, which if this is pneumatically operated, it's one or the other, and it wouldn't come through. Prime would absolutely let the fluid through. So there's an issue with the petcock just being held open. And all right, let's say it was left in prime the whole time. It's making it to the carburetor. All right, so it still needs to get past the carburetor and then up into here, into the cylinder, and then drain past the entire cylinder and get into the fucking crankcase. So, issue with the petcock, let me put that back, right there. Issue with the float somewhere, and into the engine. Oh, so I'm draining some of the tank, or I want to drain as much of it as possible because basically the tank's loose. Took the two Allen bolts off, and all I got to do is detach the fuel line. But if the petcock isn't working like it's supposed to, it's just going to dump all the fuel on the ground. So I want to get as much out as possible. I bought all of these stupid ass pumps, transfer pumps and everything, and blah 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 blah, and they never work right, ever. And I did try to start siphoning it with my mouth, and I got a pretty par for the course is a mouthful of gasoline, so I don't want to do that again. So I do have this other line, and it's going to take quite a while, but it's probably the better choice than another gulp of gas. So the strange thing, as far as I can tell, this petcock's actually working. So maybe it's not. I've got it in on now. Actually, yeah, nothing should be coming out. There's something wrong with the petcock. But, alright, so the pickup's on this side. It's an on. If I switch it to prime, we get a lot of fuel coming out. Alright, I turn it off. I'm just emptying out what's in it. I shouldn't get any. Yeah, so the petcock has got to be rebuilt. For sure. I shouldn't get any fluid. And yeah, actually, this line goes to cylinder number 4, and that's what pulls your vacuum. Anyway, that's the tank. Where's a nice place to sit? There you go. Alright, so what I've got here is very, very, very fun motorcycle to try to pull apart. I am remembering what sucked about this. And the big thing that sucks about this is the air filter. So the way that this air filter is, I haven't unbolted these two Allens yet, but you can't test these carbs really without the air filter in. I think you have to undo the boot, well, the two bolts here, and then you have to undo the boots, both sides. The air filter pushes back, and then you could pull the carbs out of them. It's just a weird way of seating it all. So I just finished up my second least favorite part about messing with these carburetors, and that is pulling off these throttle cables, specifically this one. It is such a pain because you can't get this airbox out before the carbs are out. This airbox has to live here, and there's no way to rotate the carburetors around, not much, but I got it out. You just fuck with it with a pick for a while, and eventually you get lucky, and all of a sudden it seems like, wow, why didn't I do that the first try? But then you remember you did, and it didn't work, and you try 16 other ways. So carburetors are off now, and I'm going to start tearing, well, not tearing the whole things apart. Actually, let me see. If one of these, well, all these are going to show fluid on them because I just had it running before, so. Okay, so I took the top part off, the top part of each carb that holds the diaphragm and the spring. So these are CV carbs, and well, it's not going to work exactly right without the top on it, but I didn't actually have to take these off. I figured the carbs are already out this far, and I still can't figure out what happened to the bike. I might as well take a look at all of them. And what I'm looking for is actually just to see that the diaphragms look good and there's no tears or anything inside of them. And I also wanted to see just in case any fluid was sneaking past them or whatnot. So I tested all of them. So when the top's on and the diaphragm can't move up, so you kind of push these carbs up and it goes push. So as long as it has that good suction, as far as I understand, they're fine. And I'm not seeing anything on the top end that gives me much concern, but it's just such a pain in the balls to pull the carbs off. I might as well take a look. Something I should mention about this, I just got reminded of it. It's important to have one of these JIS screwdrivers, which is, I believe, Japanese International Standard, instead of a Phillips. I've noticed it on specifically these carb top bolts and the floats, and this has been every motorcycle I've ever worked on. These have a tendency to get stripped, and they also make them out of, actually one of them is like one of these little brass guys. So these things are incredibly easy to just start stripping and circling out. And these JIS bits actually fit into what the slots look like versus a Phillips, which is intended to torque out and then slip, and it just fucks these things up. The other thing is, I don't like putting a layer of maybe a thin layer of grease on the underside of this. If I'm not mistaken, some people use adhesives and everything like that. I like the idea of not touching it with any type of adhesive at all, because I think it has a much higher percentage or likelihood of actually tearing the diaphragm. And I've not had any issues getting these things to seal without it, so I just thought that might be. Just drained all the carbs, basically loosen up they're actually not identical. You can see the bolts on these two. Just loosen these up, and the needle will let fluid flow through. Let's see, this one seemed to have more in it, so this is the one I'm gonna look at with the most scrutiny. And I don't know if this means anything, but it's also the one that's got shit. I can see fluid, but this could also be just from handling. Something interesting I found about these carbs, and actually these floats, is that, well, just to explain it, these floats are on this little pin here, so you can push this pin out. I'm going to push it a little bit so it'll start to come out, and actually once you remove that pin, this whole assembly will come out. So I'm just going to leave that one. This is one I've removed already, so there's 3 pieces to it. There's the floats themselves, the little pin, and then this needle. And this is a new needle because it doesn't have anywhere on the tip. Okay, yeah, that's a piece of white. Something that I just got on it. Alright, so these are all new. So what happens is when this float moves up and down, that needle will seat and it won't let any flow through. So I'm kind of upside down here, but right now, so this would be where it's empty. So it would be allowing flow all the way through, and as the bowl fills up, and if you're thinking about this thing upside down, as the bowl fills up, these floats are going to start floating, and then that needle is going to seat in that seat and not let anything else through. So these floats have a float height that you set them to, and you could check them with a digital caliper, and what I could find is that these should be set to 17 millimeters each. And what you do, you can't, especially on this one, this is the weird thing, what you need to do is kind of rest it on its side, and you check the float height right where, actually I should just point this out. On this needle there is a little spring-loaded, well, basically this little pin here, this has a spring inside of it, so it's going to have that much travel on it. Every other carbs I've ever dealt with, that float needle, when I hold it all the way up, that spring has enough pressure on it that it holds the floats up, but these don't. So this is the needle or the spring travel height right there. So you gotta really lay these all the way down. And since these are supposed to be at 17, I found most of them around 16, which is a little low. The higher you go, actually, the less fuel that's going to end up in the bowl, because it's going to start putting that pressure on earlier. And because these springs are just so damn weak compared to the other ones I've seen, I'm going to set these a little bit higher. I'm going to go around this whole thing and set them to 18. Because the thing is, you're supposed to set them to 17 plus or minus 1, so I'm just going to set them to 18 so they close earlier, so there's less fuel in the bowls, ideally. And once I get them set, I'll put some fuel into this and see if any of them leak. If they don't, then I know that, well, everything's sealing up. Here's where we're at. I changed the float heights from what I was reading as about 16.2 millimeters across, and I switched it to about 18. And what you do is there's this little tab right there, that little tab. So once you pull this guy off, you can bend that tab, and just a little dab will do you, because it doesn't feel like much. You put a little bit of pressure on it, and that's all it takes to change it, you know, a good bit. So anyway, I'm gonna close these back up and see if it holds fuel. This is the best I got with what I can find. I don't quite have the right hoses to make this work, so I've got this little spare auxiliary tank that comes down to a ball valve, and the issue was hooking it up to the fuel in to the 4 carbs, and I don't have much that, well, obviously it's not going to leak from here. This is fine. Just found some old fuel line that I had, and I had some barbs, and these are for air but I'm not planning on using this one again anyway, so I think this is going to be tight enough. This is pretty loose here. This might just leak all over. Something interesting. It's not even the float bowls. It's coming right out of the fucking connection. Well, that still doesn't explain how it got into the engine. I should probably shut the needle off. Okay. So no more flowing into it, but that doesn't explain it getting into the engine. Ah, shit. I don't know. This is a loose connection. I don't know if it was traveling the length of the inlet hose. Crap, I just want to know where the fuck it's coming from. Yeah, because if it's just coming down the hose, then that doesn't put it in the crankcase. So it's got to be that loose connection. So I realized I could seal this up with using one of these screw type hose clamps, and it's not leaking anymore. So now I put a new piece of cardboard under it, and I filled it up with a decent amount of fuel to put a little more pressure on it. Obviously I can't do the same as what a tank would do, but if this works, then I'll feel more comfortable about putting this back in. Anyway, this new piece of cardboard, I'll check it in a little while to see if it is showing any fuel on it. Right now I'm not seeing anything, which tells me that the floats are actually sealing this up. I'm looking at both sides, and I just want to see if any fuel starts pooling inside of any of these, because it must have been when it was sitting on the bike after it was getting past the petcock. It must have been going through the carbs and into the crankcase, and a hell of a lot of it. So it may be a little while. Again, this took like a year for that whole thing to fill up, so I gotta leave this for a little bit longer than I've got it on here, which has been about 10 minutes, but I'm afraid to just leave it on overnight. So I'll monitor it. Made the decision. I'm going to leave this because I feel pretty comfortable about this right now. I want to leave this for at least a good bit of time, so I'm gonna go compile this video together, and I'll work on putting the second one together. That'll include, well, I gotta put oil back into it, and shit, I'm not even gonna show it, but getting the throttle cable back through this mechanism is just a fucking bear. So that's gonna be tomorrow, and maybe this will work out. Please hold the gas.